I'm talking to Jason since it's the first time in class. What I do when I lecture is I tape it. Okay? So there's a webcam up there so it can see everybody so that if we have a conversation, it's not just disembodied voices. Yes, Wesley? I know you are. So, and then if you miss class for whatever reason, I will put all the lectures up on D2L, generally later in the afternoon today or tomorrow morning. And then you can watch them, and you can also use them for studying if you want to watch the material because you didn't feel like you understood everything. Do you know how to do Cornell Notes? Never heard of them. Excellent. So, do you have a blank piece of paper?
Yeah.
Okay. So, I'll give you a quick once-over for today, and then after class, when we have a minute, I'll show you how to do it, in depth. Take your paper, and you should divide it like that. Here's your paper. So, for example, you hack your paper up. The title would be character types, and then the key words are going to be the character types themselves as we go through, and then I'll give you facts about each character type, and then when you're done, you need to write a summary about whatever the whole thing was about. Okay? So as you guys know, because in theory you've done your definitions thus far, there are 4 character types. Patrick, do you need help dividing up your paper? Or are you going to do it for me? Thank you. So, flat character. Let your mind conjure up any images that you want. Write down flat. There are certain characteristics of a flat character. Like every single character is very, very specific in the sense. So, right now, left-hand column you would have flat. And then in that right middle section you would write characteristics. And you don't have to write defined by 1 or 2 traits. You can just write 1 or 2 traits. And the whole point of notes is that it's abbreviated. Often, if I were to just stand up here and talk and you guys weren't to take notes, I think it's something like you'll retain something like maybe 5 to 10% of whatever it is that I say. But when you write it down, you do that kinesthetic thing. You're doing the movement, but it's also sort of reinforcing it in your brain. So it's one of those study habits. So what's a trait, Wesley?
A trait?
Yeah, character trait.
Oh, yeah.
And?
Personality.
Personality. What about physically?
Feature.
Yeah?
Their behavior.
Yeah, it could be their behavior, their personality. What'd you say, Patrick?
Physical features.
Physical features, right. Are they tall? Or are they short? Generally, flat characters have 1 or 2. It's the tall guy. And the reason he's the tall guy is to show us how short the other guy is. He's the dumb guy. To show us how smart everybody else is. Something like that. And they show limited emotions. They don't have a big spectrum. They're either happy or sad. There's nothing in between. Generally they just have one emotion. He's angry all the time. And then they don't explain why he's angry. It's a very, very limited perspective. And oftentimes they're stereotypical or a stock character. When I say stock characters, it's just a sort of character that appears over and over and over again. It's like, oh, okay, I get it. Generally with superheroes, in our modern superhero movies, they're giving us a more full picture of what a superhero is, giving them traits and faults. But generally, when you think of a superhero, it's like they're strong and they do good. You know, they don't have a lot of depth to them. So in a lot of ways, superheroes are very flat characters. Because it's kind of like when you read comic books, oftentimes it's the same storyline over and over again. You know, it's the same sort of, I will fight the bad guy, and I will win. Generally, good characters have more characteristics than bad characters. Bad characters are often more flat than others. They don't grow or change over the course of the story. They think, they feel, they do exactly the same thing, regardless of what's going on around them. For example, a butler. The house, he's doing his butler stuff at the beginning of the story, and by the end of the story, the house is on fire, and he's still bringing the tea. That's a very flat character. He's not motivated by what happens to him. He doesn't change at all. He's exactly the same throughout. And generally, they're minor characters. It's just sort of some character that was used to get your main character from point A to point B. It's the bus driver. He might have a name. He might say, "Hey, how you doing?" But generally, he's just the bus driver. His only job in the story is to get your main character from school to home, because he got in trouble at school, and the main body of action happens at home. And good stories have a mix of flat and round characters. A story entirely composed of flat characters is kind of boring, because generally as readers, the thing that we find most interesting is that characters change. They grow, they evolve. They're similar to people in the sense that they have a broad spectrum of emotions. If you knew somebody who was like this, they'd kind of be a little boring. Very single dimension. I'm happy all the time and nothing bothers me. Or I'm angry all the time and everything makes me that way. Anybody need this for another minute? Okay. So, it helps reveal information about the main character. Like I said, the stock character is tall because they want us to understand that the main character is a shorty. The main character is sort of mean, so the stock character is nice all the time. Set it up as a comparison. Oftentimes they'll take these two characters, put them in the same situation, and the author will have them react in completely different ways so that you can evaluate the main character based on how this flat character reacts. Sometimes they'll set them up as the norm. So, round characters. Round characters are super complex and they have a variety of traits. The alien was tall, green, and smelly. Yeah. But that's the facts. Like, here's your round characters, and then in the facts you'll put characteristics. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Don't worry. You put these in a binder, and you don't get points for your notes, but they're to help you.
Oh.
Yeah. They're fully developed people or creatures. They often have conflicts within themselves. You would be hard-pressed to describe a round character in one word. They have a large range of emotions. Oftentimes those emotions will conflict just like regular real-life people. They'll be presented with a situation and they'll have to make choices about it, and those choices might cause them internal problems. They have strengths and weaknesses. They're good at some stuff and not good at other things, just like regular people. And they generally change over the course of the story. You can have a round character who doesn't change. That might be what the story is about. How they're confronted with all of these difficulties, and through it all, they remain the same good-hearted, trustworthy, wonderful human being. Yes, Wesley?
So does that mean in the story, Forrest, or a man called Forrest, he's a round character?
Yes. Because he's got a lot going on. He's not just one person. Not just one kind of person. And their role in the story is, they're generally the main character, the protagonist, and it is their job to advance the plot. Flat characters will move this person around within the story. Like, in my reading skills class right now, we're reading The Fall of the House of Usher. And there's a butler, once again. And the butler, the flat character, moves our narrator from outside the house to inside the house because he takes him to where he needs to be. And our narrator is the round character. And they help develop the theme as well. If you're looking for theme, and we all are this week, ask yourself, what is my round character doing? What conflicts are they given? What situations are they put in? Because that will help you find that theme. Because themes are tricky, and authors don't just state them. You have to be willing to hunt for it. So, static characters. Static characters are characters who stay the same. Just because they stay the same doesn't mean they're boring. Sometimes the point of the story is that you have one character with a certain list of characteristics, and that character is given some sort of difficulty, some sort of hardship, some sort of situation that really challenges who they are as a person, like their moral fiber. And the point of the story is, will they bend, or will they uphold what they know to be good and right as they go through all these trials? They're not changed by the events of the story. And they're not changed by the events of the story. They stay exactly the same. Like I said, the house is on fire, but they're still doing what they do. And dynamic characters are characters who change. They have internal change. That can be emotional, opinions, or their attitude. When I say inside, think of the mind. You know, emotions come from the mind, opinions come from the mind, attitude is a personal choice. And often in stories, it's those changes that we find most interesting. We find them compelling. Because we too, as human beings, we change every day. They have external change as well. And the external change is physical. They grow, they get hurt, they wake up one morning with a pig snout, you know, and it's because of something that's happening to them. External change is just, usually it's in response to some sort of external stimuli, some sort of external force. The kid got tired of being bullied, so he worked out all summer. And when he came back to school in the fall, nobody bothered him anymore. That's a common storyline. Anyone have any questions about characters? Character is either dynamic or static. They're not both. A character is either round or flat. It's not both. But it can be a flat dynamic character or a flat round character. That's how you pair them up. So as you're going through, you should be identifying if your character falls into one of the two categories, and then can you pair any of them up. So, let me give this to you. I want to talk about theme a little bit today, because theme can be tricky. Theme is not what a story's about. Theme is a little more complicated than that. And if you lose this, it's available on D2L. For you, Patrick. So, I'll just read right off it. Theme is the central idea or insight of a work of literature. A theme is not the same as the subject of a work, which can usually be expressed in a word or two. Old age, ambition, love. The theme is the idea the writer wishes to convey about the subject, the writer's view of the world or revelation about human nature. Theme isn't one word. That's the tricky part. A lot of people just want to be like, oh, it's love or hate, conflict. The theme is conflict. You have to be able to put it in a sentence. If you can't put it in a sentence, then you think about it some more, because theme requires a sentence. Let's see, we're going to read Romeo and Juliet this year. So my example is, for Romeo and Juliet, acting on your feelings without using your head can be very dangerous. That's one theme that you could find in Romeo and Juliet. You can find lots of themes in most literature. The only thing is, once you've identified that theme, you need to be able to define it using quotes. That's the thing. And I always tell everybody about this, and this is the great thing about the study of literature, is you're always right as long as you can prove it. As long as you can find an example within the quote and argue it, you're going to be right. It's a nice leeway between literature and science, because science, it's right because it's proven, and literature, it's right because you can argue it, because you can make me see it, because you can make your readers of your papers see what you mean. And it's really kind of cool. And literature is an evolving thing. Every time you read it, you're going to see new stuff. That's why it's worth it to read books several times over the course of your life if you really enjoy them. Because they'll speak to you in different ways at different periods in your life, because you're going through different things, you're experiencing different stuff, and so you'll react to that character in different ways. While some stories, poems, and plays have themes that are directly stated, most themes are implied. It is up to the reader to piece together all the clues the writer has provided about the work's total meaning. That's what makes it interesting. If the author literally just told you, this is my theme, and now I will write this story to show you my theme, it's kind of boring. At least I think it's kind of boring. The fun part about literature is you have to dig for stuff. You have to pull it apart. And the more you know, the more you understand about symbolism, the more you understand about character relationships, the more you'll see in stories, and the easier you'll find it to pull out a theme. So, thank you, ma'am. Josh, what was it about?
Thank you, ma'am was about,
How many characters?
there were 2.
Okay. It was...
It was a 14-year-old boy and a older woman.
Okay, so we had 2 characters, an older woman and a young boy. What happened between them?
The boy tried to steal the older woman's purse.
Okay, and Wesley, do you know what happened?
The boy fell because the purse strap broke.
He went for it, and he sort of toppled over. And then what happened? Do you remember, Ben?
The old lady, said something that I can't remember.
Okay.
It was like, I should give you the
but not before, eventually, but what do you think, Wesley? The man starts floating.
Well, she had said to him, "Are you gonna run if I let you go?" And he said yes, and then she just held onto his shirt
Okay,
and drug him to her house.
okay, and then what happened?
After he gets sort of beat up by her,
Mm-hmm.
he gets taken to her house where a bunch of her friends are probably in the other room watching some sort of sport or something, and she washes his face as his face is really dirty, and
It's okay if you don't remember.
yeah, I don't remember much after that.
Okay, so it goes to her house, and Wesley.
And then she makes him dinner, and then after they're done, she says, "Next time you don't have to steal, just ask."
Mm-hmm.
And then she gives him $10 to go buy his shoes.
Right, he wanted a pair of shoes, right? And he didn't have the money for those shoes, so he thought, oh, I'll just steal this old lady's purse. But she ends up grabbing him, taking him home, and sort of teaching him a lesson, right? Through her own generosity and kindness. Based on what they tell you in that apartment, can she afford to help him, do you think, Wesley? Because I know there's a lot of stuff in there that's sort of old, so you might not understand what all of it is. But what do you think?
She might be able to afford it because she works in the mall at a hair salon place.
Okay.
So she has a job.
Okay, she does have a job, but one of the things they talk about, and this is where you got the whole like people in the other room. She lives in an apartment where you can hear other people through the walls, which is a good sign that it's a cheap, inexpensive apartment. Okay? If you live in an expensive apartment, you can't hear anybody through your walls. You don't hear anybody in the ceiling. But cheap apartments, you can hear everything your neighbors do. I lived in apartments for years when I was in college. And I swear, it's 3 in the morning, your neighbors are downstairs watching TV. You too are watching TV. And that's just how it is. Someone's vacuuming. You know, at 8 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday. You might as well be vacuuming too. If you live downstairs, everybody's thumping above your head. And that's just how it is. You know, and if you haven't lived in apartments, it makes sense that you wouldn't recognize that. What about the hot plate? Does anybody know what a hot plate is? Yeah? What is it, Patrick?
It's kind of like a flat, like metal disc that they put on like a stove to cook stuff on.
Okay, yeah, but is it like
that.
is it a substitute for a stove? Sort of?
Yeah, kind of.
Yeah, like if you don't have a kitchen stove, like a proper kitchen, you can get a hot plate, which you can plug in, and it's just a piece like a metal sort of disc, and you can put your pots on it to cook on it. And people who don't have proper kitchens, they'll use that to cook. So she lives in a sort of inexpensive apartment, she doesn't have a proper kitchen, and then they talk about the 10-cent cake, right? So you can imagine that in the scheme of things, 10 cents maybe isn't a lot of money, so maybe that cake is an inexpensive cake. So we can assume from these details that maybe she's not well off. Maybe she can't afford to give him this money. So knowing what we know about this, what do you think could be a theme? Anybody have an idea? I know Josh came up with a really good one in his answer. But
Think before you act.
that's a good one. Think before you act. And you would support that by looking at the young boy's actions and his choice to steal and getting that quote and being like, he thought he was just going to get away easy, but instead he gets dragged to this old lady's house. And lucky for him, she's a nice old lady. Because she could have been someone really unpleasant. She could have called the cops. She could have done all kinds of stuff. But because he was completely motivated by his own want, he got himself pushed into that situation. Right? Maybe, let's see, ask before you take. Because you never know where you're going to find generous people. Granted, a pair of shoes, a kind of blue suede shoes, is kind of frivolous, right? It's silly. It's not a need, it's a want. And oftentimes in life we will find ourselves doing things that we shouldn't be doing because we want something, not because we need it. So think about that as you're working on your themes for these stories. So let me stop this and then